trumps belief
Right.
anytime. If all you have to do is get older dictionary, say a 1960 edition or older, Webster's. And if you know anything about the science and technology of etymology, which is the origin or source of words, just turn to Caucasian. And I can't quote it verbatim, but I think it will say Caucasians are people of the Caucasus Mountains, so named by Johann Friedrich Blumenbach in 1795. Now, the first thing you say is so named, right?
Right.
He was a German anthropologist who erroneously assumed that the people of the Caucasus Mountain region were the superior people and white people. And it says, however, this is now not scientific. It is a hypothetical. This is what the dictionary says.
Right.
So and now here's the background on Brother Blumenbach. He was a college student and at the university in Germany. He had a collection of skulls that people had sent him. By the way, this man never left the country.
Right.
And he finds a skull from the Caucasus Mountain region, and he picks it up, and he declares that this is the superior man based on the cranial shape, right? And he attributes it, you know, this is superior man, and so that's what they label it, and they call it Caucasian. And they picked up another skull. He picked up another skull, and he called it Mongoloid, not quite as superior as the Caucasian, but just a little under. And then, of course, he picked up the third skull, and this was Negroid, and he almost said it was almost ape-like in intelligence, a little more intelligence than a monkey, right?
Right.
This information is then used to justify the enslavement of African people. But here's what I think is insidious, Brother Herman. If you really read this for what it says, this is evidence that there's no such thing as a white race. It has never existed. But there's no such thing as a black race or a yellow race. You cannot determine the race predicated on the melanin content of the skin or the shape of the skull, nose, or the lips. You can only do that through phenotype study. That's the only way that you can scientifically do that. But what has happened is anytime you invoke the term Caucasian, you are invoking, unbeknownst to most people, superiority. That's a protracted lie. There's no difference in the human race, very little difference particularly. But this is what I find really hilarious. Johann Blumenbach later comes and says, I made a mistake. I was wrong. There's no difference in the people of Africa, and they're just as varied in the differences in them as there are people in Ireland or Germany, okay? By the way, he was in love with a woman of color by that time also. So it I think perturbs people. We do seminars on this. And we do it with so-called white people and so-called black people, and it's a very disconcerting thing when you provide evidence of this. However, if you really want to delve into this, one of the questions we put to people in our seminars is, did free people form the basis of this country? In other words, did free people author the Declaration of Independence? And people will say yes. Well, we do a process where we take words like subject, serf, slave, and then we ask them to look this up. Well, I think the people that were in the colonies, in the British colonies, were subjects of the king. And I think that they were in servitude to the crown, and they came from serfdom and villages, and several other names that, if you look them up and trace them back, you're going to get to slave, because I think the word slave comes from the word Slav. And I don't think there were no slaves in Africa. I think Slavs come from Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia.
Absolutely.
Well, when you look at this truthfully in a foundational manner, what you discover very quickly is the reason these people over here knew so much about slavery is because that's what they were. And the reason that they could come and do such heinous things to people is because it had been done to them. And so that's a wake-up call. So that's why I say so-called white people. Maybe pink. I don't think they're white.
Yes, sir. Very good. Very good. That's why this is the most informative hour on cable television and the World Wide Web. But we'll get back to thank you for that clarity on that, brother. Back to the meat of this article about the angry white people organizing. as a people, when we see something like this, what is it, in your view, that we need to do?
Well, I mean, it's always good information, I think, for people. You know, I think you need to let people know what the potentials are. I tend not to give it much energy. I think part of what they seek is attention.
Right.
And then that begins to create a reality that's a false reality. I happen to know a so-called white fella who's a friend of mine who wrote an article depicting where this starts. And he calls it, the name of the book, I think, is Hillbilly Religions. And he talked about after the Civil War was lost by the South, all of those poor so-called white people who had been conscripted to fight for the South with the promises that they would be dealt some form of equality. Well, when the things turned and they didn't get, and the people that were in power became back in power, and these people who had lost their lives for a lost cause in the first place became angry, retreated to the backwoods, and began to form the so-called militant religions, which became militant groups.
Right.
And I can understand that. They had been lied to. Well, rather than take it out on their masters, they decided to take it out on people of color. I had a man write me once after we had, in Memphis, Tennessee, and this is going to relate to this, they have a statue on the busiest street in the city dedicated to Nathan Bedford Forrest, who was a Confederate general who was credited with starting the Ku Klux Klan.
Right.
Well, we don't do things differently in Inward Journey. We do different things. So we went early one morning and buried artifacts from the continent of Africa all in this park. See, we didn't want to desecrate the memorial.
Right.
We wanted to do like the Jewish people did to the ovens, least we forget.
Right.
And so then what we determined was that every year we were going to hold a picnic and a rally, and we were going to sit there and eat watermelon on Nathan Bedford Forrest's in front of his statue and have barbecue and just have a good old down home time.
Right.
Least we forget.
Right.
Well, the sons of the Confederacy came to that event, and they tried to challenge me on what we were doing. And I said, well, we are not desecrating this man's tomb. We are just bringing notice to who he was. So I began to get some hate mail and emails and stuff, and one person in particular emailed me about that, and I asked him, why were you angry with me? Why don't you be angry at the people that took advantage of your people and disenfranchised them? And this fella actually acknowledged that I had made a point. And I think that's anger that's displaced at the wrong people.
Absolutely.
So that's my take on it. I don't really give it that much energy. Good information, just in case.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I mean, when I see articles like this and looking at CNN, looking at other news channels, and you have this, you know, most of the headline stories on these major news channels now, especially in dealing with President Obama trying to reform health care, are dealing with the angry white backlash, and you got protesters standing outside Brother Obama's rallies with pistols on their hips and assault rifles. What happened to the post-racial society that we were sold when they inaugurated our brother president?
Well, I think that was it. We were sold. I mean, I never for once thought that was going to happen out in the United States.
Right.
The educational system is, I don't want to say in a shambles. I don't want to paint that picture. I think that this serves a great deal of people to keep people disconnected.
Right.
And if you can play to a group's ignorance, then it's great news making.
Right.
It's great theater, but it's also, I'm sure that there's some profit in it for somebody. If you would think now, here's a person that shows up at a rally about health care. Why would anybody on earth want to deny that opportunity to somebody? So that tells me that this is either some form of hate or they've been paid to do this. It's probably the latter. I think they've uncovered that the insurance company and some of the insurance companies underwrote that. I can understand why the insurance company would not want any competition in that. That makes very good sense to me. So if a person is trained to see beneath the surface of things, if they have a filter to understand the truth from the false, and Brother Herman, I want to commend you, because what you said was there needs to be alternative news sources where people can get various views on this, rather than the standard broadcast that's coming off the news, because they're trying to sell advertisement. You're not.